Anyone who ever stopped to think already knew it. The extreme left has insipidly, insidiously tainted the Democratic Party for decades. Now we see the results of their hard work. It was never a war on men. It was never a war on white people. It was never a war on Christianity. It was a war on America. By whose hand and for what purpose? Well, that gets into tinfoil hat territory. But what's clear is that these people hate America. They've been trained to hate America. They've trained their American children to hate America. And those children will grow up to hate America. Just look at the board. Aside from Eastern Asian, African, and South American countries, which have refrained from becoming the world police and are heavily disassociated and relatively disinterested in anything besides economic and energy ramifications, almost every country in Europe, related countries like Australia and Canada, and even many Gulf nations who obviously have a lot of religious, cultural, and economic ties with Iran, are all anti-Iran. Now, that doesn't mean they're explicitly pro-US or pro-Israel or that they want a war, but it means they feel diplomatically inclined to renounce Iran. That's very important. They are watching their mouths to not be overly suggestive, but they aren't outright condemning it. They're only doing the bare minimum of demanding humanitarian efforts, minimizing the loss of life, and other such political fluff. Some are asking for negotiations, but in the end, they know Iran cannot be negotiated with. Even some of the stronger dissenters, like Spain, still condemn both sides instead of just the West, as if they are expecting the world to continue without changing in some perpetual stalemate. But the thing is, if you're condemning Iran's regime, do you really want it to be never-ending? And they're happy to say, oh yeah, the permanent terrorist state that produces infinite strife in the center of the world is bad. Oh yeah, of course it is. But they're also saying that dealing with this in any way besides negotiations is bad. The thing is, some people can't be convinced. They can't be negotiated with. Every human has a nature of digging in their heels stubbornly, especially when they get called out. But some will take everyone down with them. And we know how it goes with Iran already. We've already seen it. The fearmongers are saying the U.S. is evil, but are we really comparing the USA to Russia in this sort of Ukraine sort of way? I mean, are we really comparing Ukraine to Iran? Obviously, there are ulterior motives here, but the fact that the 20-year-old Democrats condemning America for this have lived their entire lives with the Middle East as the terrifying villain, with the belief that going to the Middle East is extremely dangerous for white people, for women, and for Christians. Even millennials have lived out most of their lives with this narrative. Who decided it should go on forever? Why should this part of the world be some permanent hellscape? How is anything Iran's Ayatollah stood for progressive? Democracy is seen as progressive. Negotiating is seen as progressive. Solving conflicts without bloodshed is seen as progressive. All of these are symbols of intelligence and ability to coexist. But no one sees Iran as progressive. Otherwise, they wouldn't be condemning their regime. And they wouldn't currently be launching missiles at pretty much every country around them. They wouldn't be building their bases right next to elementary schools. It's a high thing to ask, then, to negotiate with them, and foolish to demand others to forever be burdened by them lest they look like a warmonger. I like to play war games as much as anyone else, but I'm no war analyst, no geopolitical expert, so maybe it's a bit above my head. I just like the social aspect of politics, but they do seem to be tied together here. The board currently shows something long obvious, yet annoyingly portrayed otherwise on social media, by celebrities, by politicians, and even by previous vice presidents and presidents alike. Is there a difference between a Democrat accusing anyone they disagree with politically of being all the trigger words, the N-word, the supremacist, misogynist, transphobe, whatever? Is there a difference between that and a Democrat accusing the USA of being warmongers? It's the same tactic, desiring the same result, is it not? But take a look at who's opposed to the actions taken against Iran. Like I said, there are many who are trying to toe the line, saying they rebuke unwarranted attacks on Iran, without mentioning the names of who's doing it, while also condemning Iran's free-for-all retaliation. But with all of these people condemning Iran's regime, who's straight up defending Iran? Pakistan? They condemned the U.S. and emphasized respect for civilian lives and property, but they just declared open war on Afghanistan because of terrorist attacks. Russia, who said the strikes were, quote, a pre-planned and unprovoked act of armed aggression against a sovereign and independent UN member state. Right. I'm sure Ukraine, Georgia, and any surrounding area would find the theatrics of that virtue signaling quite funny. Oh, how about China, who said they were highly concerned and that, quote, Iran's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity should be respected. Right. I'm sure other Asiatic countries find absolutely no humor in that. And I'm sure that they know that China respects their territorial integrity. What about North Korea, of all places? Despite being ruled by a dictator, they too condemned the U.S., and despite being isolationists, they thought they'd go ahead and demand the just international community, whatever that means, censure the USA and Israel both. Note that all four of these countries are on a very short list of people who have nukes. And then there's, of course, Western Democrats. Well, gee, what a shocker. The West Democrats, by and large, are throwing in with the countries that are undermining Western civilization with communism, foreign religion, and a reinvigoration of racial and gender tensions. It's almost like the kids murdering their parents over pronouns, the first and second generation immigrants talking about having the majority to take over the USA, and the religious zealots shouting death to America aren't the good guys. Who could have predicted that outcome? Anyway, this video is just meant to point out how clear it is. If you didn't believe it before, you should now. You can continue to sit there forever saying, well, actually, I know literally everything, and I know that Iran wasn't going to do anything bad, and I know that they didn't have nukes, and they were never going to get nukes, source trust me, bro, and also Trump is just doing this for his ego, Kamala told me, and Trump's a bad person, and so are all Republicans, and actually everyone who isn't a Democrat is also evil, and, but at the end of the day, this is international war, not a match of Civ 6. You can be upset about which hour the clock hand points to, but that doesn't mean you understand the mechanics and workings of it any more than I do. And while I do think it was an inevitability at some point in America's future, or it would seem present, I do not understand the inner workings of it. What we can understand is that Democrats have sided with countries they claim to hate, like Russia, and countries that would happily annihilate the West if they had the capacity to do so, like China. Of course, this was obvious even before this whole business with Iran started back up. It was obvious when they demanded American citizens to attack their own government in protection of illegal immigrants. It was obvious when they defended Maduro, a 63-year-old dictator, and attempted to rebrand the capture of him as a kidnapping in order to farm sympathy by subconsciously suggesting that he was a child. It was obvious when they wanted California to join Canada. It was obvious when they wanted a brown and female president simply because of genetics and not because she would have been a good president. It was obvious when they wanted to retroactively make being an ICE agent illegal so as to persecute people they disagreed with. It was obvious when the vice president ran for presidency on the promise of trust women and reproductive freedom for women. It was obvious when they glorified the assassination of a CEO and demanded more under the slogan of F the oligarchy. It was obvious when they glorified the assassination of Charlie Kirk and demanded more under the slogan of F Christianity. It was obvious when they attempted to assassinate Trump, and then they tried again, and then they tried again, each time under the slogan of F everyone who isn't a Democrat. It was always obvious, but now in a single moment, a single day, and a single breath, there are words spoken and logged by the world's leaders themselves, and much of the modern Democrats' words align with those of Russia and China more than they do with Western and white countries. I've seen plenty of Redditors swallowing this necessary truth, just to be clear, with Venezuela too. There are plenty of people on the left who admit that these regimes were a net negative, who notice the citizens of these countries cheering and praising the USA and Trump for what they've done. Plenty of Democrats who see this as a morally gray, confusing, and potentially worrisome thing without outright condemning it as evil. But there are still many other Democrats who are anti-America. And to me, that's confusing and potentially worrisome, especially how violent people are becoming. We can only hope that things end quickly as with Venezuela, quick enough that one would question if it even constitutes a war to begin with, and quick enough that no leftists do anything crazy. But, again, how can you look at these people aligning themselves with Russia and China and not see the obvious? Anyway, thanks for watching.